This lesson is going to focus on common surface decoration methods used in ceramics, and your slab-based project is going to require different textures. So these are ways basically how to create texture. So the lesson objectives are to demonstrate the ability to use various surface decoration methods on a flat slab of clay. So this is like your practice part. You're also learning how to explore the use of additive and subtractive methods to create texture using various pottery tools. I'm going to demonstrate some of these tools, but I'm not going to demonstrate all of them because I just want you to try these out for yourself and to see what you can think of. This is practice for your slab-based project, so have fun, try something out. We're not planning anything yet, we're just trying out some different tools. So the first common surface decoration method is called incising. And what this is you're cutting into the clay, right? Think of the word incision. That's where incising comes from. But the lines are shallow, they're not carved or deep. So they're kind of like drawn onto the clay surface, but you're not carving out huge chunks of clay. These three examples here use incising. So you can see the lines here, over here, and this design here. Again, they're like shallow, they're literally like drawn on the surface. They're not carving out lots and lots of clay. So we have two examples here by some students. Where do you think the incising lines are? So if we actually look at what they did, there's incising on part of the roof as well as part of the wall, which we can see the brick pattern. And then on this part here, the wood grain design, that is done using incising. Actually, what the student did was they used a texture mat and then they drew over the lines. Here's a piece of clay. To do incising, typically you can use your needle tool as well as a ball stylus tool. I really suggest using a ball stylus tool, and you can use this to create deliberate lines. This does create surface texture because you are changing the texture. But what's great about using the ball stylus tool is this is so much easier later on when you glaze or paint your sculpture, because you can actually get the glaze and the paint easily within the lines. Now, if your clay is soft enough, you will create crumbs and boogers, which you will need to remove once in a while. If I take my needle tool, you're going to get much thinner lines. They are a little bit more tricky to remove the crumbs when your clay is soft, but that is considered incising. Piercing. Now we think of piercings as pierced ears, pierced nose, pierced belly button, but in clay, piercing is literally cutting through the wall of the clay to remove shapes. You can do this using your fettling knife and cookie cutters as well. So the piercing here would be the window or the door, which is the shape of a heart, as well as these holes and these stars. So you can see how this artist created a vase and then they put tons of holes inside of it, which are the piercings, and then they're shining light through it. This artist, they have a lot of piercings as well, but they're deliberate. They're not just like randomly taken out of the surface. Your piercings can be just like typical windows, a square, a rectangle, an arch, but they can also be shaped. You can do piercings when your clay is flat as well as when your clay is vertical. So one way to make a piercing is just to take a fettling knife. Now, if you need a determined size, you could create a template. For example, if I want to cut out this edge here, I could trace this edge of the paper using my needle tool, and then I can come in and cut out the shape using the fettling knife. But there we go, there is a piercing. And when you do piercings, you should clean up the edges, because again, if you leave them all kind of yucky, it'll stay that way when the clay fires. So again, an easier way to make a piercing is to maybe draw out the shape ahead of time. For example, if I wanted to cut out this cloud shape here, I would draw it out and then I would use my fettling knife. You can also use cookie cutters because again, they create a hole in the surface. Essentially, you're removing clay. So here's a circular cookie cutter. So I can put it right into the clay, gently pick it up and remove that clay, and there is the piercing. We also have these smaller ones. This is in the shape of a heart. So again, what I did was I just stuck it into the clay, carefully remove it, and then pop out that piece of clay. is impressions. Now this is definitely a fun one, and we do have a lot of different tools you can use to make impressions. So an impression is pressing objects into the clay surface to create an indentation. You can do this using stamps. I'm going to show you a couple tools that look like this. You can also press in leaves and lace. You can push the bottom of your shoe onto the clay. That creates an impression. So we also have texture rollers and texture mats. These are great tools for making impressions. It's pretty cool. Now this surface here, that is not an impression, but this part is an impression, and it was created using a texture mat. These also have impressions. They've been painted, but you can see the impression here. We have a bunch of different tools you can use. I'm just using the back side of this slab. Now we do have texture rollers. We have these smaller texture rollers. So again, to use them, you just roll it along the surface. There is your impression. You can also use these 3D printed stamps, which are pretty cool. You don't want to push too far down or you end up removing clay, but when you remove it, you end up with an impression of the stamp. To use one of these texture mats, what you do is you place it on your clay, and you can actually use one of these tools to push it down, or a rolling pin even. And then when I remove it, you can see the honeycomb pattern. So that is an impression as well. I do have these plaster stamps. So for example, I can push this into the surface, and now I have these butterflies. That's an impression. This cool design creates this kind of sun effect, which is also an impression. But let me show you another cool tool you can use. I have a series of these. These are called sprig molds, and they're made of plaster. So again, you have to be gentle with them. But how they work is you take clay and you push it onto the surface, and it makes an impression or a mold of that form. So if I push this piece of clay into this top space here, when I remove it carefully, I end up with this form of a cloud. So our next word is carving or carvings. So what we're doing here is we're removing large chunks of clay. We're removing areas of clay around a design to create a raised surface. So this design was drawn on, and now they're carving away parts of it. Parts of it are raised, parts of it are flat. You can see what's happening here. This is more deliberate, and there's a lot more clay being removed than incising. So these examples here, this has shapes that have been carved out. This roof has areas that have been carved out. There's carved lines, as well as these edges of these bowls. Carving sometimes is easier to do when your clay is a little more leather hard. But I'm just going to show you on this example. So carving, you can use your ribbon tool, or some sort of tool that has a looped end, and literally you can carve out a design. For example, if I wanted to carve away from this circle here, I can actually take this and carefully remove the clay. My suggestion when you're carving is to remove it in pieces rather than digging in super deep into the clay. Because if we dig really deep, then you'll have kind of these uneven lines that you have to work on getting smoothed out. So that literally creates a raised surface. And you don't have to just do a circle. You can do all different types of designs. I can also carve the interior of an area. I can just remove all the clay on this interior part. So the thing about carving is you don't want to cut through the wall, because if you do, well, then you just made a piercing. Appliques. This is where it gets more fun, but also a little more work, because appliques are 3D forms attached to the surface. So where are the appliques in these examples? Now these have lots of appliques. We have these flowers, we have these shapes that have been scored and slipped attached on the back side. So we have a burger and some blobs here. It's anything that's 3D, right? The spheres are 3D. The coils are 3D. The stuff on the roof is 3D. So how does the applique work? Well, you have to make something 3D first. You need a 3D form, and then you're going to actually attach it onto the surface. Now, if you're doing a lot of piercings, you can also use the piercings to help make appliques. For example, if I'm going to make a bunch of these hearts, right, I could make my heart and then attach it to the surface. Here's one of the circles I did. So just like any time you're attaching clay, you're attaching clay to another piece of clay, you do need to score and slip. That never ends, But just make sure that you're also taking time to clean up the edges. Here's a quick demo on how you're going to complete the slab corner with textures exercise. So once you have completed your slab corner, you're going to actually practice all 5 surface decoration methods on this corner. So I'm checking for 2 things. I'm checking for the correct construction of the slab corner, as well as how did you use those 5 surface decoration methods. So essentially this corner becomes like a little sampler of the 5 surface decoration techniques. So for incising, you can do your textures on the inside or outside. So there is my example for incising. For carving, you do need to find a tool that will help you actually carve into the clay. So you could carve freehand, or you could actually plan to carve out a particular shape. But this is practice, but make sure you're actually staying a little neat. This should look intentional, not just kind of random, right? Impressions, we have a lot of different tools you can use for impressions. So for example, maybe I'm going to do this impression on this side of the corner. So I can push that into there to see what happens, right? There's my impression, a couple of these plaster stamps. Now for appliques, you do need another piece of clay. So I just took this flat piece of clay here, cut out a shape. Can your applique have textures? Of course it can have textures. And then you will need to get slip. I put slip on there, I scored it, and then that is where I'm putting my applique. Piercing, for piercing you are cutting a hole. It is very similar to what you're going to do in your slab-based project. So there's a couple ways you can do it. One way is to literally just have your corner be flat, and you can just take a cookie cutter and cut out a shape. You can also try cutting vertically. You could do this by drawing a shape on the outside, right? That's what I'd be cutting out. Pop out that piece of clay there, and now I have a piercing. When you're all done, you're going to bring this to me. I am going to take a look and see what you did.